Statement, and I give the floor to the Representative of Sri Lanka.
Mr. President, I wish to congratulate the Republic of Niger on being the President of the Security Council for this month and appreciate the convening of this high-level meeting. The Security Council has been at the forefront of the united international response to combating terrorism, as we have seen in the benchmarks set by the Security Council resolutions 1373 and 2560 of December 2020. However, we must note that the face of terrorism has become extremely complex. Its roots have gone beyond spreading religious or political ideology, and terrorism has become a governance mechanism and a lucrative economic activity to some. It is this phenomenon, Mr. President, and the new modus operandi that we must take cognizance of and take more proactive stance in curbing. The scourge of terrorism will be a persistent threat to global peace and security unless its feeders and threat multipliers are not addressed, and climate change has established itself as one of the greatest threat multipliers. The interplay between climate change and terrorism is a critical dimension of the climate security nexus, Mr. President, and needs to be evaluated, discussed, and met with a unified global response. It is a cyclical and complex relationship where natural disasters exacerbate the existing structural and social vulnerabilities, adding pressure to the already tenuous relationship between resources and civil unrest. Peace and security are often found together in the sense of maintaining international peace and security, whereas peace was traditionally conceived as the absence of war. By Resolution 40/14 of 1991, it defined peace in a more positive sense to foster human rights, social and economic development, disarmament, protection of the environment, and improvement of the quality of life for all as a sine qua non for the establishment of peaceful societies. Mr. President, due to its inherent intersubjectivity, security as a concept poses a considerable challenge in terms of detecting any definitive normative or legal meaning. But there is no doubt as to the legal effects of security. Security considerations often prevail in drafting and implementing laws. In terms of the international legal order, traditionally, security is not viewed as a legal principle, but is seen along with peace as the primary purpose of the UN Charter and the organization constituted by it. The ICJ declared that the primary place ascribed to international peace and security is natural, since the fulfillment of all other purposes will be dependent upon the attainment of that basic condition. Without peace, Mr. President, nothing is possible. While this is a broad and open-ended definition of peace, security is perhaps more elusive, and it has not been the subject of formal definition or elaboration by the United Nations. According to the academics, the concept of security is politically very savvy. It's weakly conceptualized and a highly contentious concept. In general terms, security is an absence of threats to states, groups, and individuals, and implies methods to achieve a condition of security through measures designed to prevent threats from materializing at all. At the international when you do an international legal analysis, it tends to focus on the principles of the UN Charter contained in Article 2, which includes the principle applicable to the UN of sovereign equality and non-intervention, and duties upon states, primarily the obligation to settle disputes peacefully and the duty to refrain from the threat or use of force. However, Article 1 is important for international law more broadly because it sets the purposes, arguably the values that the UN system aims to achieve or uphold. It is worth considering Article 1.1 of the UN Charter in greater detail because it only places security, partly I say, within the framework of international law by declaring that the maintenance of peace and security can be achieved through the taking of effective measures for the prevention and the removal of threats to peace, and by bringing about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustments or settlements of international settlements or disputes or situations. Mr. President, the prospect of the UN security action unbound by international law, as one academic puts it, runs like a red thread through the Charter. First, there is the principle that the UN should not intervene in domestic affairs. But this does not prejudice action taken by the Security Council under Chapter 7. Secondly, the ban on the use of force allows for only two exceptions: self-defense and military action taken to combat threats to and breaches of the peace as authorized by the Security Council under Chapter 7. The content of the Charter seems to favor security, especially the collective coercive type found in Chapter 7 over law, unfortunately. Mr. President, the achievement of peace and security is the raison d'etre for the UN, and the enforcement of international law is secondary to that. Let me say a quick word regarding security and climate change. A central question is whether climate change is a security issue. In the late 80s, climate change was seen as second only to global nuclear war. In 2009, the UN adopted a resolution on climate change and its possible security implications in Resolution 63-281 of 2009. This resolution resulted in a report prepared by the UNSG, which identified 5 aspects that was considered as having an impact on security. Firstly, vulnerability. It said that climate change threatened food, security, human health, and exposed humans to extreme events. Secondly, development. It said that climate change results in reversing the development process, and it exacerbates the vulnerability and undermines the stability of states. Thirdly, coping and security. It said that migration over natural resources and other coping resources increase domestic issues. Fourthly, it dealt with statelessness, where there are implications for rights, security, and sovereignty of loss of statehood because of the disappearance of territory. And finally, it dealt with international conflict in the context that there may be possibility that international cooperation from the impact of climate change on undemarcated international resources. So climate change has brought the world to face unprecedented problems. It has the potential to affect the lives of individuals who live in coastal regions or a farmer who is dependent on rain. It can affect national security by disrupting the livelihoods, displacement, and migration, and increase conflict over limited resources and property of people and economy and safety of nations. In certain regions of the world, we have seen where the loss of traditional livelihoods have increased the opportunity costs of exploring membership in armed groups, as we have seen the increase of youth viewing the potentials of terrorist groups and rebel groups as an alternative source of income. Increased insurgent activity, Mr. President, feeds environmental collapse, agriculture and infrastructural loss, degradation of natural resources, and desertification, creating an environment of internal unrest, of migration, statelessness, and ending in conflict over scarce resources. Mr. President and esteemed members, understanding the root causes and ensuring that we do not underestimate the impact of climate change, I say, is imperative to ensure a long-standing global peace. Terrorism and climate change are not siloed threats to humanity, Mr. President, but rather different manifestations of the same threat, one that builds upon human fear and insecurity. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant.
I thank the representative of Sri Lanka for that statement.